we go any further in the course, one thing I do want to look at is the value of the simple tonal sketch. Now, the tonal sketch is a great and very quick and very simple way to work out what the best composition is for the picture you're doing. But it also allows you to deal with the lights and darks, so you know where the lightest lights are going and the darkest darks. And that can be translated into the colour picture, so that when you come to put paint on it, doesn't matter whether it's brown, blue, red, green or whatever, you know that if you're painting this area here, for instance, it's going to be in a dark blue or a dark brown compared to this area next to it. Now, what I've got here is 3 scenes of the same area in Pembrokeshire in South Wales, which have these very distinctive rocks which stick up vertically through the sand. Now, what I'm going to do is combine different elements from each one and see if we can create a much better composition. Now, for these thumbnail sketches, because that's all they are really, I've used a cartridge pad of 180 gram weight paper, and I've used my old friend, my 2B graphite pencil. But you could just as easily use a piece of photocopying printer paper and a ballpoint pen for this, with a few scribbles on. You can see essentially they're the same sort of compositions and some early ideas I had, and they can be as rough and ready as that. But for this exercise I've done a little bit more detail, and let's go through each one individually and see how I came to the final decision. Right, well, this first one I looked at, I actually quite liked when I did it. It was based more on this area of this picture, where the right hand side had these very distinctive angular rocks jutting out of the sand, and I changed it round slightly. I had some of the rounder rocks. I was going to put some seaweed or whatever in the foreground, and in the distance here you can see we had the sea and the distant headland. The only problem I had with that is that I felt that the composition started to push the eye out of the picture with the angle of the rocks. Right, now the next photograph I tried was an adaptation of this one, where I had the angular rocks in the foreground here, some angular rocks in the centre, the cliff running away, similar sort of rocks going into the sea, and again the distant headland. But overall I just felt that that was a little bit lacking in interest, so I moved on. Now, for this composition I came to this photograph here, and you can see there's this little family group with the dogs that are having a nice stroll along the beach, and you have the large rock, the angular rocks here sticking out the beach in the foreground and framed by the cliffs and a headland in the background. But I felt that there was something a little bit lacking here in interest that perhaps needed to balance the picture somewhat. Now, what I've done is brought some of these angled rocks in here using this large photo as a reference and turned them round so they're pointing inwards to the picture. If we go back to the photograph, you can see this rock base here. I've reduced that quite considerably because I don't want it to be competing with this rock formation, which will be the focal point. The cliff face is still there in the headlands, but they've been pushed back by making them lighter, and I've moved the family group forward into the middle distance, so that what we have now is a focal point but then a gap here, so that after your eye is settled on the focal point, it'll be eventually drawn through this gap in the rocks and down the beach to this secondary focal point, which will be the family. Now, the other good thing about a tonal sketch is you can see there's quite an area here which is quite light, which is obviously going to be the beach, but I just wonder whether I could add a few little bits of something and nothing, and scraps of lights and darks. They can be seaweed, pebbles, little bits of rock, whatever you want it to be. Well, yeah, that's not bad, that's fine, but it still leaves this gap here. Now, that's fine, but the only thing is, I think that this positioned here tends to block the view off through the gap. So what I'll do is, if I rub that out, now you can see the way the eye feeds through that gap between the two rocks and through to the family in the distance. I can put a bit of something and nothing shadow. It just could be a contour on the beach. Now, I'm happy with that because that gives a natural little path through this picture into the middle distance. Right, now you can see by putting this angular and quick strokes of the pencil, you create automatically a sort of quite a breezy effect, and that seems entirely appropriate for this. Although it's a bright sunny day, the wind is blowing in off the sea, and that's an ideal sort of atmosphere in the sky that we're going to try and create. You can also see I've just done this hint of muted reflections, which is what you're going to get on wet sand, where you're not going to get a full-blown shiny reflection, if you like. It's going to be slightly blurry, and we'll have a look how we do that. It's not difficult once you know. So I'm happy with that as a tonal sketch now, and it's given me a good idea in my head of the way I want the painting to be, where the lights and the darks are going to be, and some of the little features I've added just to enhance the composition. So let's move on to the next lesson now, where we'll look at translating this into a watercolour painting.